There are plenty of models of additional elements that would have to be added in that would be taken from the anti-hunger campaigns that went on in the 90s, the anti-apartheid stuff that basically involved all those wonderful musicians out of the 80s and 90s that, what's his name? I can't remember his name. His last name is Geldorf. He comes from England. Rob Geldorf put together the idea of creating a culture around a movement like this that expresses itself in its own music, that expresses itself in its own art. Where does all that come from? That comes from people at the bottom figuring out how you want to be able to make the next Bob Marley an abolitionist. Who creates that? Youth culture does, but in conjunction with Viacom and with big capitalist institutions, since we're not going to abolish capitalism while we abolish slavery, I don't believe, that begin to see it being in their interest to be as abolitionist as they are currently being supposedly green. Do you understand what I'm talking about? The idea of finding, these are bad terms to use when you're talking about slavery, finding your brand to be free labor. Finding your chain of supply not to be what got Nike in such trouble in the 1990s and gets Walmart in trouble all the time today. What I'm suggesting, then finally, to close this by 9:30, 5 minutes early given when we finally convened, is to suggest that there is a tremendous role for public history sites, for museums, and for people who are meeting the public as educators in ways that people who are teaching 2 classes a semester and trying to figure out what they can do on their next leave with 50% of their mind can really do to think about this movement. I'm thinking, for example, let me just give you one example of something that I know. I know of a house in New York State. It's a museum house. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece of Federalist architecture. It is the most screamingly beautiful piece of Federalist architecture that you've ever seen. It's loaded with period furniture. It's loaded with Wedgwood china. It's loaded with old family portraits that hang on the walls. It's so screamingly elite that you can't stand it. And, you know, the idea under conditions of, say, a decade ago would be to walk in and say, oh my, wasn't that grand back then? Turns out that the family that was involved in this house, and I'm not going to identify them because I don't think that would be fair, was in the very earliest parts of the Republic very, very involved in questioning the problem of slavery, even though within their own household, in earlier generations, they had owned slaves. It's a very famous name. What could you do with a site like that to be a force for getting people to see both the connections and the disconnections between the historical memories of slavery that help us and impede us in seeing the present problem, so that we can turn around and get people to understand the pastness of that past, the importance of understanding slavery in its own place and time, and at the same time have a connection that challenges you to think about what contemporary slavery is. I'll bet you can do that. And I bet you could put it together like the site museums of conscience have, if you know about those things. Ways to be able to start to interface sites so that they begin to talk to each other. Staffs begin to plan things across sites that begin to interact with each other, to begin to develop ways that people who learn about one thing can begin to learn how to learn about the next thing. And to begin to see the world more as a map of places to learn together, rather than a place to walk in, read the brochure, listen to the presentation, and then not see somehow that this is connected to a whole many other things. What I'm suggesting is that public history is a wonderful place, especially in light of the fact that so much of it has been devoted so recently to excavating the problem of slavery in historical memory. I noticed last night there was a big presentation on different variations of historical memory and slavery that I didn't go to because I was preparing for this thing, and I feel really bad that I didn't, and I want to apologize to the people that I didn't show up. But it seems to me that there are so many opportunities to begin to understand that the next group of people that you're going to see in the next 20 years are not going to be glued together the way that the last group of people was. That they come empowered with their own technologies, their own ideas, their own ideologies, their own commitments, and their own desire to be able to learn what they want to know from your site or from your museum, or from your presentation. They come with those expectations, and if at the same time it's possible to begin to move this large cultural commitment, which I think is out there, having to do with social engagement, religious inspiration, making a difference, and a globalized understanding of race and the world's interconnectedness, the possibilities of creating a new abolitionist movement are actually there. In the final analysis, before you start to dismiss me, there's more information on all this at a table that you will find over in the book display area that's got a very large map of Connecticut behind it. Ask the gentleman who's sitting behind the desk. He's right here. His name is Chandler Saint. He's got about as tall as I am, but he's got a much bigger beard than I do. And he will begin to give you a sense of how this thinking refines itself further, and also what actual people are planning to do in the very near future to try to put the movement under the people who are currently working to abolish slavery. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Yeah.